Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here on these unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Thanks to all the organizers, the beautiful music. What a way to start a morning. I grew up on these stolen lands. I'm a third-generation settler here. I'm raising 2 kids on these lands, and I feel deeply connected to this place and responsible to the land and the people here. So look, as Mark alluded to, corruption is a weighty topic for an elected leader to speak about. There are like landmines everywhere here for me. So I'm gonna ease us into it. I thought we would start by telling you a few of the things that I love. I wanted to speak to some of my people. These are my 2 kids. I am fortunate to have most of the time fortunate, to have a very big family here. My kids' grandparents live nearby, a wide network of friends that go way back to elementary school, a lot of really badass women, all of whom keep me grounded and get me away from my computer and eat my food and tell me that it's good. And really, what more can we all ask for? And these are the places that I love: local parks and splash pads. I am a diehard splash pad fan. Local forests and beaches. The Sunshine Coast, where some of my family lives, and the beaches and lakes and forests there, ferries and bike rides and seawall runs and big deep breaths in the salty coastal air. This is what grounds me and propels me. So I want you to take a moment before we get into corruption and think about what you love. Picture a place, places, faces. This is not a drill. I am actually asking you. You can close your eyes, you can keep them open, whatever your comfort level is, but grab a picture in your brain or a mini slideshow of pictures. Places and faces you love, and just feel it for a moment. Got it? Okay. We're ready. I think we're ready. So I've been thinking a lot about corruption, unfortunately, since I was asked to take this topic on. And I started thinking about corruption as brokenness. Except that maybe that's a bit too big. You know, there are cracks in everything. So I started thinking maybe it's more useful to think about corruption as that which seeks to prevent wholeness, that actively destroys what wants to heal and to grow. And there are many forms of corruption. I'm going to start really specific. If we've met, you know that I think a lot about, I worry a lot about climate change. Another piece of the rising tide that we heard such a beautiful song about. And in thinking about corruption, I was trying to think about sort of a very clear and specific example to start with, and then we'll get into all the gray and murky area afterwards. So here, I'm going to start with a case about Exxon. Reports have shown that Exxon, big oil and gas company, knew about the threat of climate change decades ago. Yet over the course of nearly 40 years, the company has contributed millions of dollars, billions of dollars, to think tanks and politicians that have done their best to spread doubt and misinformation. First about the existence of climate change at all, and then about the extent of the problem and about its cause. So Exxon knew decades ago that the products that they were digging up and selling were causing damage to the irreversible damage to the environment And they used profits from it to spread misinformation about that, to deny that that was true. And campaigns across the US have been calling for Exxon to be investigated, legal suits being started, saying that if Exxon intentionally misled the public about climate change and fossil fuels, then they should be held accountable. They follow in the model of big tobacco lawsuits, and it really is the clearest example I could think of about corruption and the impacts that we are living with. Here, locally, we're seeing those impacts of climate change all of the time. People knew that would happen decades ago and hid that information in order to continue doing exactly what has been causing it. The late folk musician Utah Phillips has been quoted as saying, "The earth is not dying, it is being killed. And those who are killing it have names and addresses." Now look, I'm gonna avoid that landmine, but this case makes me super fucking mad. And anger, often justified and righteous and useful, can't sustain us alone. I don't want to send you into the rest of your Friday in a burning hot rage, which is what I feel when I spend too much time thinking about this. So I'm going to take you back again, take a deep breath, think again about those people and places that you love. And then we're just going to go back to corruption for another moment. You may recognize this is our seawall. So the big oil and gas companies have been denying and delaying action on climate for decades, knowing that their products were causing irreversible damage while raking in an unconscionable amount of profit. But the inaction isn't theirs alone. Their efforts to deny and delay, divide and distract have been taken up by many others along the way too. By political leaders who prioritize their own re-election over the urgency to act, and by leaders across so many sectors who continue with business as usual, waiting for someone else to step up first. This sometimes gets talked about as the new climate denialism. Since the Exxon case broke, uncovering decades where billions of dollars were spent on coordinated misinformation and lobbying to deny that climate change was a problem, when that was exposed, things shifted. As Cam Fenton, one of the organizers at 350 Canada, writes, with governments across the globe naming and pledging to act on the climate crisis, old school climate denial was no longer a winning strategy. This is where we get the new climate denial, a term starting to be used more and more to describe not outright denial of the climate science, but when corporations and politicians accept the climate crisis in word, but fail to act like it indeed. At the Glasgow Climate Summit in 2021, in the final hours of the negotiations, language in the global climate agreement was amended. The coal industry had successfully lobbied a shift in the pledge language to say, instead of to phase out coal, they were lobbying for the language to say to phase down coal. And they succeeded. They changed the language in this global agreement between countries for their own interest. When the reality is, we don't need to phase down coal. We need to get off of all fossil fuels, and coal is the dirtiest of those fuels. Just like we need to get buildings off of gas. In Vancouver, 55% of our carbon pollution comes from burning so-called natural gas in buildings. Plus, gas in buildings is linked to indoor air pollutants that increase chances of asthma in children and more. But across North America, local gas companies continue to lobby against efforts to electrify, and I can tell you, I have seen that lobbying happen up close. It's like we're in existential negotiations. The smoke and fire and flooding are literally at our doorstep, and we're still pushing action down the road. So this is where we are now, and I think many of us wrestle with all of this. But again, I don't want to get stuck there. So what are we going to do about it? This is what the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, said back in 2018. Every action matters, every bit of warming matters, every year matters, every choice matters. The new climate denialism isn't as villainous as its precursor, but it still can't continue. If so much of corruption in our modern world is fueled by lies and confusion and misinformation, one of the antidotes to corruption surely is honesty and truth-telling. Part of what you were all asked about earlier this morning, speaking truth to power, holding power to account, speaking truth to bullshit. This doesn't always mean shouting louder, though you all know sometimes you have to find creative ways to break through the noise, but it also means working together on systemic changes that deepen accountability for big oil, for politicians, and more. It means being honest about the scale of the emergency. For decades, people have been told that climate change is bad and getting worse, and then we've been told that the solution is to buy recycled toilet paper or have shorter showers. There's a huge cognitive dissonance between what we've been told is the scale of the crisis and the solutions we've been presented with. We need a new conversation, and it requires creativity. So this picture is from 2009. The National Cabinet of the Maldives held an underwater cabinet meeting to call attention to the threat of global warming on the island nation, which scientists say will be uninhabitable by the end of this century because of rising sea levels. At the cabinet meeting, under the sea, officials signed a document asking all countries to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions. It garnered global media attention ahead of the 2009 Global Climate Summit. And I remember seeing it then. I love these types of acts of creativity. There's more. Another antidote, I think, to corruption is social solidarity. It's community and participatory democracy. It's nurturing and strengthening every instinct that we have toward wholeness. Human connection keeps us healthy. It maintains and builds trust and curiosity and compassion. I really like an idea that I heard from author and researcher Brené Brown, who says that people are hard to hate close up. People are hard to hate close up, so move in. Early in the pandemic, mutual aid networks sprung up all over. Maybe you've seen some of them in Vancouver. Food pantries and fridges. Neighborhood houses and other community organizations were setting up phone trees and outdoor visits to isolated neighbors. These networks then became invaluable in the heat dome in 2021 as well, where 100 Vancouver residents died, largely overheated in their own homes. And actually, mutual aid and social solidarity are common in sites of extreme weather. We often hear in these examples about looting and hoarding, but those are outliers. Many, many more people, after extreme weather events, in cases of disaster, many, many more people are showing up to help their neighbors and strangers. They're setting up food distribution and community health clinics. They're basically creating an emergency social safety net and making sure that no one is left behind. Social solidarity is about relationships. It also requires systemic change. So the Reverend Lennox Yearwood, who's the leader of the Hip Hop Caucus down in the States, says that organized people beat organized money every time. So alongside creatively telling the truth and building social solidarity, I think our work is to organize around efforts that challenge entrenched power, that right past wrongs, that bring people together and breathe life into a future for the places and the people that we love. To organize for policy wins that allow for healthier, more whole people and planet. Everything from ending fossil fuel subsidies to supporting workers and communities in transition to building secure and affordable housing, climate-friendly housing, and this is my only distinctly political pitch. It also means, as we heard earlier, voting. It means organizing to elect leaders who will stay true to these priorities, even in the face of all of the lobbying and pressure that exists. All of that is our work. So I want to lift up a few examples before I wrap up of just a few of the many examples of folks doing exactly this work. Locally, the Tsleil-Waututh Nation has been fighting to protect their land against the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion through a Tsleil-Waututh Nation effort called Sacred Trust. It's rooted in culture, in land, in research and science. It's loving, and it is fierce and uncompromising. I also am really excited about and grateful for a project called Architects Declare Emergency. Architectural professionals across the country working toward a broad commitment to not just green buildings, but healthy ecosystems. As I said, 55% of our carbon pollution in Vancouver comes from burning natural gas in buildings. So we need building experts on board, building zero-emission homes, retrofitting buildings, building beautiful, complete, walkable communities where people can know their neighbors, people can get to the places that they need to go without relying on cars, where people have cooling in heat domes and clean air and the social supports that they need. Architects Declare Emergency has a beautiful website. You can Google search it. They talk about their commitment to designing for whole lifestyle reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and advocating for investments in rapid transitions to renewable, resilient, climate-positive alternatives, adopting place-based regenerative principles and practices, and more. So I sort of wish I became an architect. Maybe that's part of my love for these folks, but the work is so important. And across Canada, 239 architectural orgs have signed on already. The last effort I want to highlight, though there are so many more I could excitedly tell you about, is Shake Up the Establishment, a national Canadian youth-led effort to put climate back on people's minds and on the ballot. It was started in 2019 by some graduates at Guelph University and has been expanding across the country. They're working to increase informed voting and voter turnout around the fight against climate change while maintaining positive government relationships, positive stories and action. They're nonpartisan, they're volunteer run. And in their words, they are all about giving power to the people to hold their leaders accountable in an accessible way. Creatively telling the truth, building social solidarity, organizing to combat corruption, and to fuel all that makes us whole. All of which is to say, we are in good company in this work among creative, ambitious, big-hearted people. Which is good because we need all hands on deck. So if you are a designer, if you are a grandparent, if you're a student, a bartender, an artist, a teacher, a worker, a retail worker, a tech pro, we need you. I think about this a lot too in a 1967 speech entitled, "Where Do We Go From Here?" Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. challenged his own community of faith leaders that love alone is not enough. Dr. King said, what is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. So think back one last time to what you love. Hold it again for a moment and then think about this. The climate emergency is the defining crisis of our time, the project of human survival. When you gather with grandkids or you reflect among friends upon the arc of your own life, years down the road, what will you be able to say that you did? Were you courageous? Were you creative? How did you pitch in to challenge those who poison our air and water, our politics and our people? How did you actively nurture all that seeks to be whole? We'll leave you with that. Thanks.
Who has our first question for Christine? We have 15 minutes. Over there. Tell us who you are.
I'm Shiraz. I'm the creator of Grandparents Film Festival. So congratulations, and the world needs you. My question is, how do you differentiate corruption from lobby? I mean, can you be against corruption and support lobby group? And I was asking another question, what can I do to convince you to change Victoria Day to Grandparents' Day?
Changing Victoria Day to Grandparents' Day. I love it, and will tell you it is not in municipal jurisdiction to do that. But I appreciate the idea. You know, it's the question of sort of what defines corruption as opposed to influence in different ways. I don't have a specific delineation of this is when it's corruption and this is when it's just, I think it's a spectrum. And there's all sorts of lobbying that happens, and it's not all nefarious. I come out of social movements, and we certainly try to support and encourage and pressure politicians through all of our organizing to make good decisions. So I don't even know within lobbying how you define that, except to go back to my sort of bigger picture thinking about, is this moving us towards healthier, more whole people, communities, planets, or is this seeking profit at the expense of the health and wholeness of all of us together? And that's for sure a bit vague, but I think that's all of our challenge in navigating where we're going to be thinking about and pushing towards what is whole.
Did I see a hand over here? Any others besides this one? Okay, I'll come to you next.
Thank you, Christine. That was amazing. I'm like in between rage and hope, so I think you hit the nail on the head with the presentation. I don't have kids, but I know there are folks here that do, and of course I too was a child at one point, and these conversations can be so challenging. How do you talk to your kids about climate change while keeping them hopeful, but also being realistic?
Yeah, it's a good question. We actually, in my family, my younger kid in particular experienced a lot of anxiety through the pandemic, and one of the things we realized is that we maybe need to pull back a little bit on how much we talk to them, have the news on every morning, all of that. I think my youngest was 5 when the pandemic hit, and it really impacted him. So we are just constantly navigating that. My kids here, my partner's a climate activist. I am like obsessively talking about housing and land use all of the time now, which my kids tease me about. But so they're involved in all of these conversations often. We bring them to rallies and events. So I think the piece that's important to me is that they understand the issue, which they do, but also that that a majority of their interactions about it are active. I think a lot about action being how we combat the despair and anxiety that these issues bring. And actually, I feel really lucky to get to be in a position where I can be making decisions, maybe slightly less on this council than last council, but where I can have some impact on decisions on issues that keep me up at night. And I want my kids to be able to feel like they can act in some way too. So even just going to rallies where they're surrounded by hundreds or thousands of people who also care about this issue and are working on it, I think that's good for their souls. We do this thing in our family where the kids each get an allowance, but a portion of their allowance goes into something we call their tzedakah fund, which is a Hebrew term for just charity, really justice. And then at the end of the year, the kids get to each decide where their tzedakah funds go to, so what issues they care about, and then within that issue, we talk about what different groups are doing what, and a big conversation about how they can contribute in that way, as well as in how we are living as a family. We put solar panels on our roof and got all the gas out of our house, and the kids were like deeply involved in all of that. So I think it's about involving them is my best answer. And like, we're doing it imperfectly, but we're all trying. Yeah.
Hi, Christine.
Hi.
In Vancouver, what's the biggest landmine we have to have the courage and vulnerability to start addressing head on?
Like climate related, or all of the things? I think it's housing. And shocking. I know that was a shocking answer to you, so I'm just letting it sink in. We have not yet nailed housing, affordable housing in Vancouver. I mean, there's so many pieces to the housing puzzle. There's no one silver bullet. But I will just get like really nerdy for a moment. Again, shocking, and I'll let that settle in. Really nerdy for a moment to tell you I do think land use is a huge piece of it. So much of the city has been reserved and preserved for our most expensive forms of housing. And not only does it mean, we're cramming rental housing and nonprofit and non-market housing into a few small areas of the city, but actually it's also not good for those neighborhoods. I grew up in kind of Dunbar. We see neighborhoods where we're not building rental housing, we're not building missing middle housing, and co-op housing are emptying out. People, small businesses up on West 10th are struggling. There aren't enough people to go there. Like, it's not good for those neighborhoods to be trying to sort of preserve them in time. And it's not good for all of us. People are commuting further into Vancouver because they can't afford housing here, or they can't find housing here. We have this, what a past city councillor, Gord Price, referred to as the grand bargain in Vancouver, which is that we have for decades just built new housing on busy arterials and then left neighborhoods off of those arterials kind of untouched. And actually in old planning documents in the city, it refers to those buildings as a buffer for noise and pollution from the rest of the neighborhood. And I don't know about you, but I don't think that we should think of renters as a buffer of pollution from the rest of the homes. Like, it is, am I allowed to swear? It's totally that we do that, and it's a big it actually is a big challenge to overcome, in part because of who votes. Renters have really low voter turnout. I mean, municipally voter turnout is low anyway, but it's a challenge in a lot of ways, and it's a climate challenge. I think if we want to reduce carbon pollution, which is 55% from gas in buildings and 40% from gas in transportation, we need to build complete walkable communities, zero emission buildings, places where people know one another and can support one another. So housing is a big nut to crack on inequality, on social isolation, on climate, all of it.
For the record, I want everybody here to note, and especially Nicholas, who works at TELUS, and to my team who has to edit that, I'm not the one who dropped the F-bomb. It wasn't me. It was Christine.
Nobody told me I could.
No, swearing's allowed. We're just not allowed to put that on TELUS, but it's fine. We edit it.
No, don't worry.
It's fine. Okay, here we go.
We have a question from the Zoom room from Angie. The question is, reflecting on Melanie Mark's recent resignation, she's curious to know your thoughts on how women can be encouraged and supported to become involved and stay involved in government when it's clearly been so challenging to work within these systems that remain colonial in nature. Any thoughts?
Yeah, great question. I have so much love and respect for Melanie Mark and the work that she's done, and the courage that she had in the role and the courage she had as she's been stepping away from it. I do think she has shifted the system for being in it, and lots of respect to her for knowing when for recognizing she needed to step out of it, but even her having been in it has changed it for future MLAs. And so, you know, I do think and hope many of us in the system are in there putting our elbows out all over the place so that there's more space for the next people who come in. And a lot of our work, you know, not everybody is going to run for office, not everybody is going to get elected to office, but I think all of us have some responsibility to seek out and encourage underrepresented folks to run for office, and then have their backs. Like, campaigns cost money, campaigns require volunteers, particularly campaigns that are driven by people and not big Chip Wilson money. Am I allowed to say Chip Wilson here?
It's been said.
Yeah, so 2 F-bombs. You know, those campaigns need our help. Those folks need our help. They need encouragement. There's some stat that women need to be asked 7 times more often to consider running for office than men, and women of color even more. It's hard to step up, so that is some of our work. And then to show up and keep having people's backs even when they're in office. Like
We have time for one more question, but I'm going to make a comment. That was a question from a woman answered by a woman to the audience. I want to talk to the men for a second. If you happen to be a white, straight, privileged, middle-aged dude with influence who may or may not sometimes get asked to run for office, I wonder who I'm talking about, use that power to support women. Get on those committees and help find these women and be the 7th person to ask them, please run, please represent us, and let me be on your team. Okay, one more question. Whoa, I'm gonna go with the woman. Sorry, dude. Going to the back of the room.
Pia, right here.
Hi, Christine. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Do you have a moment where you were like, I have to run for politics, and that you also were like, I love the environment and I want to fight for it?
Okay, let me think about the first one first. I really resisted running because I also feel like I am not the hero we need either. Like, I have lived a life with a lot of privilege, and there are other people I want to get elected into office, and I spent many years working on recruiting and supporting other candidates, some of whom have run, some of whom decided not to. In the lead up to the 2018 municipal election, I was helping run something through one city, Vancouver's the municipal party I'm part of. We had a Next Time team. We had a pretty broad network of folks who were considering maybe possibly running that we were supporting and encouraging for a couple years out of the election, so that we weren't just dropping people in at the last minute. And as we got closer and closer to the election, a number of folks decided they didn't want to for a mix of reasons, including that it looked like a terrible job. And so I got encouraged by a bunch of folks to run and think a lot about one of the challenges that they suggested to me, which was to try to do this work in a way that creates space for other people to come in, and that sort of breaks it down in the role while I'm in the role, so that and invites other people, other voices in, so that they could get a sense of the system and consider stepping into it. So that was a big piece of convincing me that I should try to do it in a way that would help encourage other people to want to take that step. On climate, I would just say I actually came to climate work through social justice and global justice work. I wasn't really like a wetlands and polar bears kind of a person, though obviously I like wetlands and polar bears. I don't want to suggest otherwise. But I was doing worker rights, anti-globalization work, anti-poverty work, and was seeing increasingly the way that the climate crisis was inequitably impacting people, that it was already most impacting poor and marginalized communities, racialized communities, locally and internationally. So it was through call to be working on for people and on justice that I got involved in climate action.
That's 10 o'clock, folks. Christine Boyle, our good friend David, who's here, David Ives, is an artist and works with reclaimed wood, and was said to me, he does these each month, and he was like, yeah, I didn't think a piece of wood that said corruption on it was going to exactly be a cherished keepsake for our speaker, so he got creative. I love it. And something else thank you very much. Thank you very, very much.